that you're my favorite kind of musician, because to me, you can play a Mozart piece on the piano or something, but you're just merely reading the notes on the page. The idea is to ultimately feel that music and then put your own essence into it. And were you listening to guys like Johnny Smith, or can you talk about some of the early records that you just wore out the needle on and how you learned to pick out those notes by ear?
Well, when I was growing up, my parents had folk music records in the house because my father was interested in American folk music and folklore. When he was a kid growing up in Austin, in the vicinity of Austin, Texas, his father was a bank manager and he was a precocious student and was personally acquainted with J. Frank Dobie, who was a folk story person.
Wow.
From Texas, and often traveled down into Mexico to learn songs and collect songs from and stories from country people in Mexico, and and my parents had Woody Guthrie and Cisco Houston together and separately on 78.
Absolutely.
As well as Burl Ives records that was probably my primary source for a lot of stuff. I was just thinking the other day that probably the first song I learned to sing that came from outside the family was my father was a keeper from the Eddystone Light, something with a mermaid one fine night. From this union there came three, a porpoise and a porgy, and the other was me. Yo ho ho, the wind blows free. Oh, for the life on the rolling sea. And I go on from there. I met her in Venezuela. Just stuff floats up from those early records of Burl Ives and also Josh White. I playing straight ahead blues.
Well, I want to be clear. This is fascinating to me. When you say like folk and folklore, I think this is really important, especially when you're talking about indigenous people from outside of this country. Do you remember a tale or a story that your father told you related to one of these tunes that came from Mexico?
No, because my father had very little personal experience with the people who were folk singers and folk tale tellers.
Right. No, because you said he was hooked up with that cat down there that went.
Frank Dobie, who I hardly ever met.
You never. Okay, so that was kind of Mayne was just a babe at that. You never really got to meet that cat.
No.
Yeah.
I had very little. He was a mentor of my father's when he was coming up in school. Frank Dobie, that is. And but my father's contact with the music was pretty much of the same nature as mine.
Absolutely.
We had a copy of Carl Sandburg's Song Bag, collection of folk music, folk songs, and that was the source of when I heard the song. Most often, I could find it in the Song Bag and learn the words from there. So I I had extra verses that the original source didn't have for a lot of songs because I could find them in the song bag.
The song bag. I love the song. Hold on. I just when would you say your dad was a precocious student growing up, but you know, Mayne, for me, one reason like I know that we were connected cosmically is just because music today. I mean, I'm 45 years old, and it's the only thing that is healing for me. It heals my psyche, and I feel like music so much today, especially if you're going to a concert. The significance of music has changed so much in our culture, in our society, and I just wonder if you could talk about if your father or even the people around you in those early years, the Sandberg bag years, if you recognized early on that music was a healing force.
Well, I never thought about it as such, but it certainly it was a place, it was an activity, a world, a contact with the world outside my family and outside the personal experience of everybody that I knew, that I could relate to. I was just magnetically attracted to this whole scene, and I recognized that it came from different people who had backgrounds of experience that I would never have heard of without listening to what they were singing on the records that I had.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned entirely from records until, well into my teens. I was experiencing the music very much in the way that somebody who grew up in a cabin back in the hills or
I knew this. I'm loving Mayne. This is dude. You are my main man, dude. Yeah, you were. Were you in Berkeley? Did you grow up in that northern?
No, my family moved around a lot. My father is a famous scholar, or was.
Oh, really? Well, in what subject?
My father's name was Henry Nash Smith, and his PhD thesis turned into a book that was widely read.
Oh my gosh!
It was called Virgin Land: The American West in Symbol and Myth.
Oh my! I need to get my hands on that immediately.
And he was in essence the founder of a field of academic pursuit that came to be called American Studies.
Wow! Holy cow!
And he was kind of the acknowledged generator or producer of this field of study, which involved history, sociology, and literature, both musical and not music as such, but folk song. And there was very little technical knowledge of music or sight reading of music involved in any of this.
Right. It was more about like the times as such sociologically and how that was bared out in the music itself.
Right. His main the materials that he used to provide source information was largely his main contribution, or most definable contribution to the study of American literature, was to recognize that what were called dime novels that were published in the 19th century were the origin of characters like cowboy heroes and the woodsmen, the Leather Stocking Tales by Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Wow.
Wow. The frontiersmen and the early explorers of the plains and the mountains of the far west.
How did he? I mean, I don't want to get. I mean, this is the Mayne Smith interview. I don't want to get too into your father, but I just at the time, how did he primarily do? Did he have access to any primary source material? Like, were there cats that could? I mean, this stuff sounds like it's dating back a few hundred years. I mean, there was nobody alive from the time that he was chronicling, was there?
No, not really.
So, yeah, I'm curious about his research methodology. I mean,
what he was studying was cheap literature, what they call dime novels.
Dime novels, yeah.
They were the means by which the heroes, including Buffalo Bill, but extending to fictional characters,
right,
who were the heroes of stories of Calamity Jane and some women, but mostly men, who were part of the exploration of the West, defined as the part of America that was not populated by farmers. The people who were making our initial cultural contact with the Indians.
Absolutely. This is absolutely. So I want to be clear. You guys moved around because he was teaching at different institutions, or because he was doing?
Yes, he was a founder of his field of study, really.
This man is unbelievable. This is unbelievable. So he was basically the troubadour of that field of study.
Well, troubadour is the wrong word, because he was not a musician.
Yeah, I'm sorry. He was a pioneer of that field.
I would say, yes, one of the founders of that. One of his mentors was Bernard DeVoto.
Wow.
Who is famous in American cultural studies. And I think I mentioned the name already of J. Frank Dobie, who studied the same level of material for Texas and the part of the Mexican culture that was adjacent to Texas.
He was your dad's peer, right? I mean, he was your dad's...
He was his mentor. These were the senior people that he learned from. He graduated very early from college. I think he got his college degree at the age of 16.
Holy cow!
And was an assistant professor in his 20s, and he was connected with literally everybody who was interested in this kind of stuff, because he was part of that group in his 20s and early 30s.
Where did you guys wind up settling, at least in your teenage years, so to speak?
Well, we moved around a lot.
I know.
I was born in Boston when my father was finishing his PhD at Harvard.
Oh.
But he had already taught for 5 or 6 years at the University of Texas in Austin. And from there we went to, so I was born in Boston, and then raised in the first couple of years around Austin, Texas.
Right.
And then we moved out to Pasadena, where my father was studying and working at the Huntington Library in Pasadena to complete the publication of his book, Virgin Land, which was based on his PhD thesis. And that book won prizes and recognition as a founding of this field of American studies. And I was called Tex in the second grade.
What were you? What were you were called?
I spoke as a Texan.
Oh, you called they called you Tex?
Yeah.
Oh, I
when
love
I
it.
was
You Tex.
about-
I love it,
when I was
dude.
like
I
8
love it.
years old.
Oh, this is great. Yeah, that Texas drawl. I love it.
I don't have any of it, but my father, even though he was already a professor in his middle 20s, he an associate professor,
Sure.
he always had kind of a southern lilt.
So you're you're at the he's at the Huntington Library. You're just a kid.
Yeah.
Do you remember how you sort of where the first urban center was, where you transitioned from just picking the guitar and learning the song bag, and then going and actually checking out? I just remember. I mean, this is a little bit jumping ahead, but the great David Lindley. I'm not sure if you ever hung with that guy. You know who he is?
Well, I was in a band with him.
You were in a band with David Lindley?
That's right.
Oh my God, dude, this is out of control. Go ahead.
One of the first bands that I was in Southern California in the early '60s, and in the middle '60s. It's kind of hard to get the chronology.
Don't worry, man. I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna help you a lot because you're about to bust into something very special right here. Go ahead.
But I was in a band that used to play at the Ash Grove occasionally, while I was employed as kind of an artist wrangler. That is, setting up the microphones on stage and talking with them and introducing them to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, the Ash Grove is proud to present.
This is so amazing, dude. So you knew Ed Pearl down there right away.
Oh yeah.
And you were one of the cats who was like bringing in Mississippi John. I mean, not bringing them in, but you were introducing Mississippi John Hurt.
I was introducing them.
Yeah.
Over the microphone. I wasn't on stage. I was sitting up in the sound booth,
sure,
just getting the sound levels balanced and the microphones balanced. And I just learned how to kind of set a proper number of microphones and work with the band to determine how we were going to set the stage up. And then I would go up to the sound booth and turn the lights up and down and introduce by voice through the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, here, the Ash Grove is proud to present the Chambers Brothers, or what was that?
No, I want to read this to you. This is so special, David Lindley. We're going to get to this band, but I want to read this to you and then have you respond to it, because I did 4 interviews with Lindley, who recently passed away. I don't know if you heard that or not.
No, I hadn't heard.
Yeah, he was sick for a while, and he passed maybe 2 months ago. He was I consider him like you. Well, I can already feel this sort of beautiful familial bond. He was a beautiful cat, and you knew him personally. But this is from one of my interviews with him, and I want to read it to you.
Sure.
And then you can respond. He said, Ed Pearl, who is the owner of the Ash Grove in Los Angeles, would have people come in. He would make sure these Mississippi sharecroppers had the transportation, had a place to stay, and he paid them really well to come to the Ash Grove and to play for a week. We all went there, and we'd hear these guys play and go, holy shit. It was all people of a certain age: May, Ry Cooder, Al Marion, Sandy Mosley, David Cohen. We'd learn all this stuff, and we had our version of it. Jim Queskin was the resident guru at the Cat's Pajamas in Arcadia, where I played all the time. That was the first time I heard Queskin. He was getting together a jug band, and he was looking around for people in East L.A. There were a lot of fantastic players there. I used to go see Mike McClellan every time he played. He played the 12-string like Leadbelly. He played the banjo like Ralph Stanley, and he sang. I'd go see him all the time. it was the folk process. You didn't go to school, you went to the club. You absorbed and you learned how to steal. I mean, and I know that Mayne Smith was right there too, man. And that to me is so magical, man. I just feel like you guys were, the music process itself at that time had not been codified. I mean, there was some literature out there, but it wasn't like everybody had a book out or the music wasn't being made in the academy. And as a folk musician, you guys were going and absorbing it in the clubs.
That's right.
So, tell me about this band with Lindley. I mean, you're telling me that around this time you met him at the Ash Grove and you guys were like, hey, let's...
Among the people that hung out at the Ash Grove. Actually, there was also an outlet or a branch of McCabe's Guitar Shop that had space and at the front of the building, right off the street. And then that shifted to the Troubadour, which was fairly nearby. And I actually worked and managed that store facility for a time while it was at the Troubadour. So, and I would frequently be holding the store open and selling strings and picks and occasionally an instrument while bands were rehearsing at the Troubadour. Oh. That was the first time I ever encountered Neil Young, who was playing lead guitar for, I can't remember the name of the band.
What was it, Buffalo Springfield?
Yeah, that was it.
Wow.
I wasn't particularly engaged in what they were doing.
Absolutely not. I dig, yeah. But he stood out to you.
Well, yeah. He was a hell of a guitar player. And his singing style was, he didn't sing very much with them, but I recognize his vocal style was sui generis. It was, he made it up himself because he sang the way he sang.
Yeah.
And he put his mark on it, everything that he touched musically, both instrumentally and vocally. I wasn't a deep fan of it, but I recognized that he was really, his own thing that he brought to this whole field of music.
Do you have any idea what the name of the band you were in with Lindley was?
It was called the Bluegrass Band. It didn't last more than about a summer.
The Bluegrass Band, man. That's beautiful, man.
The fiddle player was Richard Green.
Oh, my dear friend Richard, man.
The guitar player was a friend of mine called Mark Levine, who was younger than I was. Oh. He was the primary lead singer, and I played the dobro and added tenor harmony to his voice on a lot of things. I have a picture up on the wall in the next room. I could run next door and... No, it's
right. No, I mean, this is... Did you... I know Richard for a while at that time was he used to let Scotty Stoneman crash at his pad. Did you get a chance to hang with Scotty at all?
Not really. He wasn't a comfortable guy to be around.
No, he was not.
Tremendously heavy drinker.
I know, but he could burn on the stage, man. He was burning it up.
Right, and Richard, I think Richard went to school to Scotty. He established a relationship. It was not unlike, Scotty in a way was a mentor of Richard Green.
Absolutely, they played the same instrument, right? They were playing fiddle.
Well, that's what Richard was. That was what Richard was drawn to, and he was totally knocked out by what Scotty was doing, and he was right at the point in his own. He had violin lessons, and hadn't really been able to figure out what to do with the fiddle in the context of the folk and country music world. He was just getting exposed to it himself, and he encountered Scotty Stoneman and just put something together with Scotty that, a relationship that enabled him to really go deeply to school to what Scotty Stoneman was doing, and correspondingly contributed to keep Scotty in one piece, more or less, and make it to the gig on time.
That's right. It's a very good point. It was sort of it was quid pro quo. He was learning all these tricks of the trade, and then he was keeping him on track to at least get him to the show on time, make sure he had a place to sleep after he was drunk. It was
exactly.
Not that you had not Scotty Stoneman, but in terms of the, Taj Mahal was showing up there. The Fishberry Melton was showing up there.
The Rising Sons with Ry Cooder, something Ed Davis.
Jesse Ed Davis.
And
they were called the Rising Sons.
I'm sorry.
They were called the Rising Sons.
Correct.
Oh my God! So, was Barry the Fish Melton down there at the time?
Yeah, I never. Well, let me think about this.
Because I know he used to show up and play, and he used to see Taj. He was. I know you collaborated with him later on. I was like, well, I wonder if Mayne and Barry knew each other back in that time.
I wasn't. There was some point at which I was helping to control the balances on the microphone while they were recording at somebody's house. The guy. Oh, this is very complex, but
yeah, take your time, go through it.
There was a guy working at McCabe's Guitar Shop, the branch they had in Santa Monica, where I also occasionally. No, I don't think I ever actually worked at that outlet of McCabe's, but I can't remember the name. But his mother, I remember, was Fay Ray, who was the girl in. It was King Kong played around with in the movie.
Absolutely, totally, yeah.
And this guy, I can't pull it all together right away. But this is, it was weird how this whole Hollywood scene interacted with the world of bluegrass.
I cannot even imagine. I mean, and can you just articulate how that intermeshing of sort of the glitz and glamour of that Hollywood scene played into this rugged? I would say rugged.
I'd have to think about that. It was just occasional points of contact, and I was part of it, just by virtue of being. See, when I came out to California, first of all, my father was a literature professor.
Absolutely.
At UC Berkeley, and I came out to California to go to UCLA because there was a man named D.K. Wilgus who was teaching part-time in a folklore program that existed at UCLA, and I came out because D.K. Wilgus was the only acknowledged, accepted scholar in the academic world who was willing to study and pay attention to hillbilly music, and realized that also was part of the record of American music as a whole and folklore.
Why? Let me ask you. Why did he have street cred? Why was he the only one?
Well, he got his degree at the University of Kentucky in Bowling Green, I think,
Oh,
or
yeah.
at least he taught there. And he had enough of that acquaintanceship with hillbilly music that he was able to recognize that that there was no clear-cut division, no space between folk music and folk song and what was understood to be hillbilly music.
Right,
that was the songs
right.
and the culture that was being communicated not only by Woody Guthrie and Sisto Houston, but the bluegrass bands and Bradley Kincaid as a ballad singer. That is, he recognized that commercial country music was part of a continuum between the folk music tradition and pop country. Tex Ritter, for instance.
Absolutely, you're doing a great job articulating this. By the way, I mean, you're saying that there was a schism, though, primarily between what people assume to be more hillbilly music in most people's eyes was unsophisticated, rural, untrained musicians, and that didn't necessarily intermesh with the traditional folk songwriting, that kind of stuff. But in this
the world of folklore, as it was born, and as an academic field,
right,
did not really. Its attitude was to look at this from above and from outside, and to regard the population of the performers and the bearers of folklore as being completely separate from pop culture and commercial culture.
right.
And when I was at Indiana University, those of us who were this is an unusually exaggerated situation. The guy who ran the folklore program at Indiana University, it was the only place you could even get a degree in folklore in the East. From a perspective, those of us who were active folk musicians, singers of folk songs, were regarded with suspicion because what we were doing was like commercial stuff that set us apart from the pristine academic world of folk music studies. I wrote and published the first article that appeared in an academic journal that was devoted to bluegrass music.
This is unbelievable.
An Introduction to Bluegrass was the name of the article, and it appeared in the Journal of American Folklore in 1965.
Oh, my God. I just want to be clear about something. You use the word commercial as opposed to folklore studies in the academy. In commercial, in the sense of you just were trying to get gigs and get paid for it. The music itself was not. I wouldn't. I mean, the way I look at commercial music today, it's like, are you trying to make a hit record? That's commercial. But
no, I meant commercial in the sense that the practitioners of the music were being paid to perform.
Right.
Bluegrass bands were appearing at music festivals in the East, and the genre of bluegrass. I mean, Bill Monroe was a professional musician. He became successful because he was Um, he earned his living by playing music in public, and bluegrass was included on. I mean, he was appearing on the Grand Ole Opry, and that made him. That put him outside the frame of reference that most folklorists were willing to consider as a part of the continuum that I think of as being people's music.
Now, I'm just for my own.
Ironic, but
No, this is so important. So they put him outside of that box. What would be the square definition of somebody inside the box of the folklore lineage?
Well, a folk musician or a bearer of folklore was not being paid to do what they did. Their motives were pristine. That is, they didn't think of themselves as, they didn't make a living by performing.
I got it, man. I love this.
Any serious fiddle player who couldn't earn some money by when they were hired to play for a dance or accompany somebody singing, they were no longer folk, quote, folk.
Wow, this is mind blowing, dude. You're telling me that these cats, it was a purity test. You played, and it had nothing to do with compensation or any kind of gig aspect.
Well, I think it was understood that a fiddle player had to have, if they were going to play music with other people, particularly fiddle players and banjo players, they were going to be playing for other people. But it was an uncomfortable truth that they had to make some money from their public performances if they were going to have the time.
Right, but they
make it worth their trouble to learn how to play their instrument and perform songs.
But just going full bore into just being a road dog and gigging and playing live bluegrass, that you were considered an outsider.
Well, I'm not sure in what you sense when you say you, but yes.
Bill Monroe. Bill Monroe he didn't spend any time in the academy. He made a living playing live shows for money, Grand Ole Opry commercial gigs, so to speak, and that put him outside the box of the traditional folklore.
Right. When he got his start, he was playing. He played rhythm guitar for a guy named something Schmidt.
Wow.
This was a fiddler. I think he actually accompanied a black fiddler who was very popular in.
I got to look this up.
In the area of Rosine, Kentucky, which was Bill's hometown. And he was accompanying this fiddler. And was paid for it. That was his entree into commercial music.
Unbelievable.
But he also appeared. He also played mandolin with his brother Charlie Monroe, who played the rhythm guitar, and was the primary singer for the Monroe brothers. And they were recording. Their competition was like the Dillmore Brothers and the Blue Sky Boys. That makes three sets of brothers who were recording in the late 30s and were thought of as sort of a category of hillbilly singers.
This is Mayne. You are wax. You were just. This is so. Tell me about your article. And ultimately, were you trying to be inclusive and saying, "Hey, let's stop the separation here and the purity factor, because this hillbilly music has every right, as just as much right as any traditional."
Well, that, of course, is my attitude.
Yeah.
The article is called an introduction to bluegrass, and it was controversial, but
why?
it was John Greenway, who was the editor of the Journal of American Folklore at the time, and he understood what was going on. Greenway was, I think he was in Boulder, Colorado. I can't remember what the details were, but to have this article, the title of which was An Introduction to Bluegrass, he understood what the point I was basing what I was doing on. I was trying to point out that that bluegrass was a legitimate object of study for somebody who was engaged in the academic approach to folklore and folk music, and that there was a tradition of bluegrass, a field of bluegrass, which was learned and performed very much as somebody from out in the country who never got paid or hardly ever got paid, or just got paid on the occasional Saturday night dance or something like that.
Right. And it was that was just as legitimate as the other one.
Yes, it was an admitted connection with popular culture and commercial culture that did not disqualify a musician or a singer or a tale teller from being considered as a part of the culture of oral, A-U-R-A-L, and oral, O-R-A-L, music that was learned and transmitted by ear without the use of written music. Although records were an extension of that oral tradition.
Absolutely, Mayne. Oh my God. But I mean, it was coming from I can't see you really having like you were a relative unknown in '65, with all due respect. I mean, did you have some?
Well, I'd never published anything, and I had recorded with a few people a little bit.
Who had you recorded with at that point?
No, let me think. Let me go.
Yeah.
Some kind of I think I have a discography somewhere.
Yeah, no, but it starts in it starts with Jim Queskin's America or something, or like that.
Yeah, I played dobro and pedal steel on some things.
I'm going to listen to that album all day today in honor of Mayne Smith. But I know, but you were. This is really important because you're telling me that you were in the studios with different types of bluegrass musicians prior to writing that article. It's okay if you can't remember. We'll get back to it. This is only set one. There's no way we're going to cover everything today. But my point is that when you wrote that, you were coming at it from a young, hungry bluegrass musician, and so it had.
You have to remember that at the time when I wrote that, I was entering, or thought that I was probably in the process of training to enter the profession of my father,
right,
who was at that time a professor in the English department at the University of California, Berkeley. And but meanwhile, I started playing music with my friends, Scott Hambley and Neil Rosenberg, who were also students at Berkeley High School with me, beginning in the 9th grade at at Berkeley High School.
What year was that? Do you know?
Well, we all graduated in the spring of 1957.
Holy cow, this is unreal, man. Holy cow.
And we had the first bluegrass band in Northern California. It was called the Redwood Canyon Ramblers.
I want to talk about that band. You had that band before, during high school, or was this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think we started performing together at a coffee house called Northgate, which was half a block away from the north of the University of California campus on Euclid Avenue in Berkeley.
Oh my God!
And we appeared. There was also a guy named. Just blanked on it flew out of my mind. Pete.
It's all right.
Who played with us on occasion, but we were trying to reflect what we knew and understood and loved about real bluegrass players that we heard on records. We had never actually. We had probably seen Flatt and Scruggs appear at a folk festival. There was a University of California folk festival, 1968. But that was, this was 10 years earlier.
I want to be very clear about this. You graduated because the folk fest at Berkeley, all the publicity Alice Stewart talks about is the folk fest of '64. But I bet, was there a folk fest in the late 50s in Berkeley?
I don't remember. I think it started maybe, I don't remember.
It's okay. But you're telling me that you were...
A guy named Barry Olivier, who was sort of the linchpin.
That's who it was. That's right. Barry Olivier.
And he was working for the ACL... the student body organization, and booking for the Bears Lair, which was like a coffee house.
Oh, this is great. The Bears Lair, dude. This is great.
And we performed there occasionally.
Now, when you say performed, let's be clear. These were gigs for money, or were you coming at it from the more, not that we
were getting paid. Not very much, but that was the idea. Was we were trying to find gigs, and there weren't very many outlets for it. And Barry Olivier he actually helped to create a Northern California Folk Music Society or something like that, and there were club meetings. It was not a commercial organization. It was just a group of people that.
Let me ask you something. So,
sponsored events.
Just real quick, because this was pretty prevalent in the late 50s. I know this is Berkeley, but would you go check out, like, they had the Peanut Gallery at the Black Hawk, Basin Street West. Oscar Peterson could play, but, if you were a minor, you could go sit in the Peanut Gallery and watch Dizzy Gillespie play and get a Coke. Were you interested in the Jazz Cats at all, or was that sort of just off the grid for you?
Well, I was sort of aware of them, but I never went to gigs like that. I mean, I just wasn't.
Yeah, I wasn't hip enough. I would never have been hip enough to.
And I didn't have any money.
Yeah, but it's $2 to get in. You did, but I mean, as far as jazz, because there's an aesthetic with, especially with the the hillbilly music that we've been talking about, where you play the head of the
gigs of that. There was no place we could go and watch a bluegrass band. We were it.
No, just the sort of the
bluegrass in Northern California. We were it.
You were it. I was just gonna say the parallels between sort of hillbilly music improvisation and jazz improvisation. There are crossovers there where you leave the head of the tune. You go
absolutely.
And
bluegrass at this time, and the organization of the music involved trading off of solos and play improvised group improvisation with people with the band backing up a series of individual solos in the course of playing the music and stuff like that was definitely influenced, if not based on, the way jazz was played in Texas during the time Bill Monroe's band came into being. The first edition of the Bluegrass Boys was in the late mid-40s and in the late 30s,
Right?
And it was Texas swing, country swing music was musically hot. It was the swing era, and there were bands in Texas, Bob Wills, that were right smack dab in between the tradition of folk type dance bands and the commercial bands that were trying to get gigs on radio stations and playing for large format dances in the area of Texas, and no doubt in lots of other places that we don't really know much about.
Would you say the Redwood Canyon Ramblers, were you channeling some of that? Were you leaving the head of the tune and improvising? Had you really gotten to that, even though you maybe weren't acting?
Shit, yeah.
Yeah. But that to me, like that is.
We got together to play. We started playing before we'd ever heard anything called bluegrass.
This is unbelievable. This is unbelievable. You had never heard the term bluegrass before you formed that band.
I think that's probably true.
Oh my, that is so class. Okay, continue. So you were.
We had heard Flat and Scruggs, but it didn't even really. It wasn't clearly labeled.
No,
that name.
no.
The term bluegrass didn't come into common use anywhere that we were associated with until the early 60s or maybe the late 50s, but I don't think we knew the word bluegrass.
You were basically playing a genreless music at that point in your eyes. There was no word for the music you were playing.
Well, we played Flat and Scruggs, and I don't think we'd really heard the Stanley Brothers very much. It was a huge event in my life when I first heard the Stanley Brothers and realized that this was a really different approach to what had to be regarded as the same type of music.
Absolutely.
That Bill Monroe and I hadn't heard very much Bill Monroe. You could buy Flat and Scruggs records in almost any store that had LPs in the country music section, but the Stanley Brothers, much less Reno and Smiley and Jimmy Martin, that stuff wasn't there. I mean, it was Flat and Scruggs or nothing. And
I want to ask you something. Why was there no distribution of those cats? Because they weren't in the traditional styles of the folk lineage? I'm just curious why they didn't get Jimmy Martin and those cats. I mean, obviously in today's world, it's readily accessible, but why weren't they distributed? And why was Flat and Scruggs distributed?
There was nobody particularly interested that the record stores knew about.
I dig.
Most of the record stores were unaware that there was anything like that.
Wow.
And if they were aware, they just didn't. It wasn't part of what they were trying to sell because they didn't. There was no market for it. We were part of the phenomenon that ended up being the market for that area of music. as it came into being.
Now, you're not going to tell me that Mayne Smith was already writing original tunes with the Redwood Canyon Ramblers, were you?
No.
Good. So you were playing essentially cover tunes, but were you improvising? Were you stretching out some tunes that otherwise would not have been, that would have normally been packaged in like a 2 or 3 minute song, and you guys realized that they were conducive to stretching out?
Oh, sure. Well, one of the things that we did was, for instance, we had played the song Jesse James,
Right.
which works fine as a straight ahead bluegrass arrangement, and that was one of the first things that we did in that style, because we all knew that song and we learned how to sing it together. And that and a bunch of other stuff that, say, Woody and Cisco used to sing together as a duo, and maybe some Delmar Brothers songs, stuff that was available on a few records, on a few albums, along with, of course, Flatt and Scroggs' repertoire.
Sure.
So that's what formed the grist for our mill. You know?
Dude, I am loving this, dude. How are you feeling right now? Do you want to? We've been cooking for an hour, but we have so much more to get to. How are you feeling right now? I mean, what I'm saying is we could.
I'm willing to go for a while longer, but
I got my younger daughter downstairs, so I feel like maybe another 10, 15 minutes, and then we can do set 2 maybe this week sometime, if that works for you.
Yeah.
I have to ask you about a couple of guys because I know that you must have been you were a forerunner in this mode of bluegrass. The 2 guys I wanted you to talk about when you first crossed paths with Jerry Garcia and Robert Hunter.
Well, I never knew Robert Hunter.
Nobody did.
And I never encountered Jerry Garcia until after I had moved away and had been going to school at Indiana University, or came back out for the summer to visit or something like that. And it was just, I don't think I ever actually played with Jerry Garcia at all, or maybe just very, very briefly. And David Grisman was another.
Well, no, that's the other cat I wanted you to talk about. David's a dear friend of mine, and I've done about 5 interviews with him. And you wrote the liner notes for a Garcia Grisman album. So I'm curious, you were clearly, David was both of those guys were fanatical bluegrass musicians, but both of them came along after Mayne Smith. So can you talk about, I know Dog must have tracked you down and been a huge fan of yours.
I had no idea. If he did, I had no idea about it. I had been playing music with Harriet Rose and her husband Artie Rose in living rooms, theirs and mine, on different occasions. But Harriet became, she had some functional role for Grisman's music.
Yes.
I helped to put the label together. And I think she was the one who ended up asking me if I'd write album notes for the album they released called Not for Kids Only.
That's exactly right.
And I listened to the soundtrack and just wrote up some notes. But I had never actually I didn't know.
You didn't know David. You didn't know Grisman personally either.
No.
So I'm just. This is really the overall.
When I met him, it was in Harriet's living room. She played bass in a band that I had, and Artie played dobro, and I played the guitar and was the primary.
When were those? What years were those approximately?
Oh, I don't even know the dates.
I mean, it was maybe in the 70s or the 80s, or not totally sure.
Oh no, geez, when was that album released?
That was the early 90s, so maybe it was around that time.
Oh, no, it wasn't that late because you've had me jumping around.
No, I do. It's a jam session here.
A wide stretch of years.
No, so this is the question. Don't worry about that. I want you to just
wait a minute. I just found the note.
Yeah.
I found the notes for Not for Kids Only.
Oh my God, this is great! I got to see those.
That I happen to have in a file. What's the date on that?
I think it's 91 or 93.
I just can't remember.
So this is what I want. This is what I want you to talk about as we wrap up set one, because we haven't even gotten into Mitch Greenhill or all the crazy music that you've done in your career. But you have this band, Redwood Canyon Ramblers. Then you went to.
I went up to Indiana to do my to continue. At that point, I went back to Indiana because they had one of the only academic folklore programs in existence.
Did you go? I thought you might have gone to UCLA to study with that credible professor first.
DK Wilkes.
Right.
No, I went to Indiana first and got a master's degree there. And in fact, folk singers were regarded with considerable suspicion by the guy who ran that program.
Why? Wait, why though? Why?
In effect, I was told that they would grant me my master's degree on the condition that I would not come back and bother them anymore.
Oh my God, dude! What were you? You were. How was Mayne Smith bothering anybody? You were not bothering anybody.
Well, Richard Dorson, who ran the folklore program at Indiana, didn't really want to have anything to do with folk singers because that was popolore, not folklore.
Whoa.
And
whoa.
He wasn't really interested in folk music for the same reason. He just didn't want to be involved with stuff like that. He wanted to be more, I don't know. There's probably no word to describe it.
Well, what did he want?
A folktale person.
Yeah, I dig. So he was the idea of even putting melodies and harmonies into stuff bothered him.
He wasn't interested in music.
Right,
at all.
Right. So he basically was like, Mayne.
It hadn't existed at all.
He's like, Mayne, listen, get your masters and get out, and we'll give you your masters as long as you don't come back.
Exactly. Well, that's quite literally the case.
I mean, that is so insane, dude. Yeah.
I had an oral exam for the master's degree, and I remember they asked me to name some important folklorists, and I forgot to name the name of Stith Thompson, who was the biggest academic name they had at Indiana.
Oh no, dude! You're going to the woodshed after that.
Specialist, and I forgot to mention Stith Thompson, and I was told that they would pass me for my oral exam and allow me the master's degree on the condition that they would never see me again. And I told them that I'd already been accepted to begin in folklore at UCLA.
All right, so listen, this is a perfect place to stop set one. We will pick things up at UCLA. Mayne, you made my day, man. It's been so great to talk to you. I will send you a copy of this later tonight. I'll email it to Gail, and let's find the time this week. I'll call you, and we'll find a time to pick this conversation up.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, sir.
It's been fun.
It's been good, right? We were kind of all over the place, you know?
I'm sorry, Jake. When did you say you were calling back?
Gail, I'm gonna send you a copy. This was a really one of the most glorious interviews I've ever had in my life, and I've done about 2,000. I will get you a copy of this later, and then we can set up a time to do set two. I'll email you a time or something.
Sounds good.
Much love to you guys. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.